Today, we're going to talk about things that were on the horizon or possibilities, some very distinctly possible, others not so much. But either way, either entirely did not occur or maybe parts of them occurred and other things that didn't. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So like I said, I'm going to try to get you out of here and so forth. So the first thing we're going to talk about, some of these you may have heard of or be familiar with, others not so much. But we're going to talk about Pater Lake State Park. And it was going to be situated on about 300 plus acres just southeast of Riley. It was a 185 acre lake created by constructing an earthen dam across Indian Creek. The Hamilton Isaac Walton League petitioned the government as early as 1937 to approve the project, but it wasn't until 10 years later in 1947 that the state finally agreed to move ahead with the project. The land was donated by Dr. Walter Pater, hence the name of the park. Initial costs were projected at $150,000, but before the dam could be built, certain sections of Riley-Millville Road would have to be raised between 6.5 and 13 feet at an added cost of a whopping $16,000. Back in 1947. However, this amount was deemed kind of steep, and the Butler County Commissioners were reluctant to pay that extra amount. So the project was delayed several months before they finally agreed to do so. Eventually, the road work was approved, and the $55,000 lake construction project began in the late summer of 1949. Dam was completed in September of that year. The removal of brush, trees, and other obstacles in the future lake bed was completed by December of 1949. Then, in the first week of January 1950, the rains came, and the error was realized. Engineers had neglected to take into account the effects of the creek waters when at flood stages. They had also miscalculated the water amount that was going to drain into the creek. So they kind of made a couple mistakes. And when I say the rains came in January of 1950, it wasn't a lot. It was basically around 3 inches of rain in about 2 weeks. Okay. However, that 3 inches of rain, 2 days, that amount of rain, the newly raised road that was 6.5 feet to 13 feet higher than it was already 12 to 18 inches underwater. So, and surrounding fields were flooded as well. Additional rains over the next few weeks caused massive problems, and it was decided that the only solution to avert further disaster was to bust the dam open, which was done on February 25th of 1950. State decided that corrections would be too costly. They abandoned the project. And it would be 1960 before the land would be reopened for recreational purposes, when agreement was reached by the Butler County Park District at the time and the Ohio Wildlife Division. And today, Pater Park is 34 acres right there off Riley-Millville Road near what used to be Bunker Hill. And it would be a few years later, in the mid-1950s, that they would build a similar dam across 4 Mile Creek and create Acton Lake, which again was the start for Houston Woods State Park, which is mostly in Preble County, but it is a little bit in Butler County. So Butler County's first state park ended in disaster and never came back. So in 1974, Hamilton city officials proposed creating what they called Pioneer Park. It was a 25-acre spot along the Great Miami River at Neyland Boulevard, where Williams and Fairview Avenues come in from the east. The main attraction to the recreational area was to be a full-scale recreation of Fort Hamilton in its original design before it was expanded by General Anthony Wayne in 1792. So it was the original Arthur St. Clair design. The original site of the fort could not be used due to previous development in the area. So it was decided to be located about 2.5 miles south. It was planned that half the money would come through a federal grant, and the rest would be through selling 40-year municipal bonds. The estimate was between $1 million and $1.5 million for the facility. The buildings within the fort and all the other amenities would be historically accurate. Other attractions in the park would include a native tribal village, a sutler's store, recreational facilities, sports fields, a boat dock on the river, concessions, restrooms, and even buckboard wagon rides. Costume tour guides, craftsmen, and soldiers would be employed to authentically interpret the history of the area, as well as the fort specifically, around the time period of the 1790s of this area. By 1976, the city had turned its attention to the American Bicentennial, and Pioneer Park project was shelved indefinitely. It's been brought up sporadically, in the ensuing 3 decades, but current costs of operating such a facility today keep the idea in the unfeasible category. In 1788, John Cleef Sims, former member of the Continental Congress, contracted with the government to purchase land between the Great and Little Miami Rivers to the east and west and north of the Ohio River. His original purchase was around 2 million acres. Operating under dubious legal and business practices and suffering from unknown surveying errors at the time, Cleves multiple times did not uphold the terms of his government contracts. The government on multiple occasions scaled back the lands under his purview, and by the time the final patent was issued in 1794, Cleves' land area totaled a little over 311,000 acres. So that's quite a reduction. Despite this, Cleves continued to sell land outside of his contracted purchase, as well as selling warrants for tracts of the same land multiple different times to different parties. Despite vigorous sales, Cleves was behind on his payments to the government for his contracted land. And in 1792, Congress authorized George Washington to issue stipulations to Sims's deed. Included in those stipulations was the reiteration of the federal contingency that there was to be a college township set aside to be as nearest to the center of the land tract therein before granted. Hamilton was the area most suitable for the government's requirements of an undeveloped 6-mile square township of land for a future state college. Unfortunately, Cleves did not set aside such lands, instead choosing to sell as many deeds as he could. So, 2 days after statehood in 1803, the Ohio legislature decides to take responsibility for locating the college lands, and the federal government allowed Ohio to select lands outside of the original tract owned by Sims. In 1809, Oxford Township was formed out of a portion of Milford Township, but it would not be until 1824 that Miami University would begin operations. So, if greed wasn't Cleves Sims' apparent driver, where would Miami University be located today? Possibly very close to where Hamilton campus is right now, but who knows? 1920 would be a banner year for city planning in Hamilton, Ohio. So on December 1st of 1920, city planner Harlan Bartholomew of St. Louis, Missouri, submits a final report to the city of Hamilton containing his suggestions on what the city could do to improve itself in the coming decades. Traffic was already an issue in 1920 with the increase of automobiles and the juggling back and forth in the battle between rail and auto. At times had basically deadlocked the city, and much as it did all the way up until the mid-1980s. So the study took 16 months to complete, covered all aspects of urban planning, such as transportation and traffic flow, amenities, rail issues, zoning, building codes, recreation, city services, facilities, etc. Of the dozens upon dozens of suggestions for city improvement, very few were initiated, and none of them to the fullest extent. The largest of the suggested topics include the installation of a central Union Station to alleviate numerous road traffic disruptions by trains stopping to load and unload both passengers and freight. So back in the day, when you had the train station that was right down there on current-day MLK, when the trains would stop, they would actually, to unload or whatever, they would literally stop and block High Street as passengers and were unloading and unloading. The Pennsylvania line did the same thing. So for massive amounts of time, these trains weren't even just going through town, they were stopped in town. So what they decided to do, or what the suggestion was, is to build a larger station just to the south. It was to be bounded by 4th, 5th, Sycamore, and Charles Streets, with the main entrance facing west on 4th, and basically was fronted by the 4th Ward Park, or what's also known as Ludlow Park. So in 1920, Hamilton was serviced by 30 passenger trains a day. 2 stations served the community. Both of them were built in the 1800s and were, for all intents and purposes, obsolete. Elevated tracks would ease rail crossings at High Street, 4th Street, and multiple other locations. For whatever reason, city officials chose not to investigate the possibility of the new station, despite the multiple issues that plagued the city concerning rail problems. In 1948, the next city planning exercise also advised a larger multi-rail service station, but again, to no avail. Other major suggestions included a new civic center, which is the picture down there on the lower right, that would basically consolidate all county and city government into a few buildings instead of having them spread out around the city, create a new park. There was also some suggestions to basically block off High Street from 4th down to Front and from Market over to Court to create a new plaza area and relocate the traffic to either to the south or the north. And up there in the upper right, that is some sketches of what possible the entrance to the fairgrounds could be, utilizing the canal that was still there at the time, and some other things to make that a more feasible and attractive entrance to the fairgrounds. So, as I said, a lot of the same concerns were brought up again in 1948. There was another city plan that was developed in the mid-1950s. And again, for whatever reason, most of those suggestions were not done. The city of Hamilton was set to have a, quote, horse and buggy style transportation system, where you had roads that were taking very strong jogs and things like that, dead ends and stuff, and it wasn't very conducive to having traffic flow through the city. Oddly enough, sometimes we still suffer that same feeling through the town. But those things never occurred. Immediately following World War II, cities across the country decided to pay homage to residents who gave their lives in service of their country by constructing what they were calling memorial coliseums for civic and recreational events. More than 8,000 men and women from Hamilton served in the war, and supporters of a memorial facility in Hamilton said that the facility would be a fitting tribute to those who sacrificed for the community and for the country. In November of 1946, a $435,000 bond issue was placed on the ballot to build such a facility. The issue would have cost property owners 39 cents per $1,000 of evaluation and to pay for 15-year bonds that would be issued by the city. As planned, the new Civic Coliseum would seat 6,500 people for miscellaneous events such as concerts, dances, mass meetings, conventions, community dinners, celebrations, and sporting events such as boxing, wrestling, or roller derby. Seating for basketball events would be around 5,000 people. So when the final vote was tallied, over 62% of voters favored the project and cast an affirmative vote. However, Ohio law at the time stipulated that such issues were required to pass by a 65% margin. The initiative failed to meet the mark by 429 votes. Now, why this issue was never revisited in the future is unclear. However, its closest living cousin, based on size and amenities, is the Allen County Memorial War Coliseum in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and that building is still thriving and used regularly today. It has been expanded and upgraded. But for whatever reason, it never made it back on the docket for Hamilton. In In December of 1948, a blue-green colored GM EMD 7A diesel electric locomotive stopped just north of Hamilton. The engine pulled the General Motors Train of Tomorrow. It was making its 130th stop on a national tour, and the train parked on tracks on the east side of Erie Highway between Dayton Street and the intersection of Heaton and Fair Avenue, across from the fairgrounds. In the 2 days the train was in Hamilton, 6,555 people from around the area stood in line to get a look inside the future of rail travel at a rate of about 15 people per minute. Hundreds of people on the second day who were waiting in line were turned away as the schedule dictated departure. The engine that led the train was not unique, but it was the 10 cars it pulled that excited guests. Again, decked out in blue-green paint with silver trim, the cars included a 72-seat chair car, 2 44-passenger sleeper cars, 3 52-seat dining cars, and 4 68-seat observation and lounge cars. All of the cars were what were called dome cars, designed with dome glass ceilings to provide maximum visibility for passengers. In 1948, 1929 still marked the high point of automobile production in the United States as the Depression and then the war slowed and then all but stopped the making of autos. After the war, rail travel was still the most popular and easiest method of travel. However, the auto boom in the early 1950s, coupled with Eisenhower's interstate highway system in 1956, the rise of air travel marked the death knell for passenger trains, as freight trains made lines much more money and caused fewer scheduling hassles. So on April 20th of 1971, daily passenger train service between Middletown and Hamilton ceased, and the very next day, the government created Amtrak. The last Amtrak train to stop in the county did so in 2005 at the old Hamilton station. The romance of the rail still intrigues people, but will viable passenger rail service ever return? I know there are sources that are trying, and perhaps it will be successful, but it will never be as successful as it was in its heyday. And the fact that GM shifted a large amount of its resources into rail design since the automobile design had stopped for several years was an indication of where they thought that might be going, but it was not to be. So Hollywood Land was pitched in late 2021 by out-of-state developers. The proposed project was a controversial yet ambitious proposal that aimed to transform over 50 acres of land along the Great Miami River in Middletown into a destination mixed-use commercial, residential, and entertainment district. The vision was to cost about $1.3 billion and was described as the first of its kind in the nation, projected to attract approximately 3.5 million visitors annually and would create thousands of new jobs. The proposed amenities were extensive and aimed to provide a comprehensive entertainment experience, including a major indoor entertainment and concert venue for artists and touring Broadway productions, indoor amusement park featuring themed rides, virtual reality experiences, indoor water park, for a full-service destination hotel and convention center, as well as a family-oriented hotel with a water park, permanent motion picture studio, sound stages, and support offices to attract filmmakers, and multiple restaurants, bars, and integrated retail shopping. Despite initial enthusiasm from some city officials who viewed it as a, quote, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, unquote, the project faced significant public opposition due to concerns over its financial viability, impact on local historic districts, and the previous downtown development fiasco of the City Center Mall from the 1970s still hung over the city, causing trepidation. But the largest question that was asked by the public was, why Middletown? Public meetings between city officials and the public and the developer grew increasingly contentious as they proceeded. Developers requested delays of a city council vote to further engage the community, but the effort eventually stalled. And in January of 2022, the city officially announced that there were no further plans to pursue the project. Could this have been the project to revitalize Middletown? Possibly, but once bitten, twice shy attitude of most of the citizens killed the project. Six months after the U.S. entered World War I, top brass from Wright Aviation Field near Dayton scheduled an inspection of Fairfield Township land 2 miles west of Sims Corners and south of the road that connects Sims Corners to Venice, which is today's River Road. On October 20th, 1917, Hamilton Mayor John Holzberger had arranged a spectacle with Major Peebles of the Army's Division of Aeronautics, which was a branch of the Signal Corps at the time. The Mid had arranged a flyover of the city with residents to be alerted to such with the ringing of fire bells when the planes approached. The exact time was unknown, but at 8:45 that morning of the arranged day, the bells sounded. Citizens initially panicked and flooded telephone lines to discover the cause. Word spread, and soon thousands of people searched the skies for the approaching squadrons of aircraft. Shortly before 10 a.m., the Journal reported, quote, thousands of Hamilton people got their first near view of the giant battle planes of Uncle Sam's army. The planes dropped thousands of pamphlets encouraging citizens to buy war bonds, and at the designated site, a giant white stretch of fabric marked where the field would be. Major Peebles passed over the site several times at 3,500 feet before landing his plane that was called the Black Maria. The paper stated, the site of the aviation landing field has been chosen and now awaits only the approval of Major Peebles, commanding the Wilbur Wright Aviation Field north of Dayton. However, that approval never came, and the local U.S. Army airfield never came to be. And as you can see, this is actually, so obviously the gravel pits have come in, but this is still a huge chunk of relatively flat land. I did not bother to look up at who owns that property. I'm going to guess it's probably the city. So that was going to be the general area where a new U.S. Army Air Corps base was to be located. But did not occur. So you're all probably going to be familiar with this next thing. So between 1991 and 1995, and just as recently as not too long ago as well, rumors and speculation flew rapidly around southwest Ohio that land in Union Township might contain an 80,000-seat football stadium and a 24,000-seat arena with the hopes of luring an NBA or an NHL franchise to the area, or at the very least draw some games from those leagues. The stadium was to possibly be the new home for the Cincinnati Bengals. At that time, the Bengals made it known that they were no longer interested in staying at Riverfront Stadium and were looking for a new local home, or brought up even the possibility of perhaps moving to another city. Soon the Westchester proposals began hitting the media with speculation as to who the secret funders and organizers might be. Reports stated that groups from New York, Lexington, and Cincinnati were competing. The last investor to meet with county commissioners before the announcement was made that the team would stay in Cincinnati as long as the public vote on Hamilton County funding passed was a mysterious person who claimed to be, quote, a wealthy business speculator, was an author, a former FBI and or CIA agent with unique experiences and connections with a wide swath of investors. The identity of that person was never made public. County officials proposed the I-75 and Allen Road site, or a site south of I-75 and Ohio Route 63 near Monroe. The Allen Road site, the Westchester site had a 2-to-1 preference with commissioners. However, Westchester officials were dead set against the proposed development as they were completely unprepared to handle the consequences of dealing with events of up to 80,000 people in terms of infrastructure, emergency services, local businesses to handle customers, etc. The county was preparing to order a feasibility study when it was announced that the team would enter negotiations with Hamilton County in 1994. And all chances of the county as the home of the Bengals ended in 1996 when Hamilton County voters approved a sales tax increase that led to the construction of Paul Brown Stadium, which of course is now Paycor Stadium. Neither of these sites would be feasible anymore. As you can see, the Monroe site now has industrial development on it, as well as some other things. And of course, you now have new retail and development and things of that sort at Allen Road as well. So time is of the essence. So if we were ever going to get the Bengals, that was the time, and it didn't happen. Between 1899 and 1920, 104 Ohio public libraries and 8 academic libraries received funds from industrialist Andrew Carnegie. Nearby communities that received Carnegie's assistance include Cincinnati. He funded 9 buildings there. Dayton, where he funded 2 buildings, and 1 each in Lebanon, Germantown, and Miamisburg. In Butler County, the Middletown Public Library and the Miami University Alumni Library were built with Carnegie funds. The criteria to receive funding from Carnegie was actually very simple. The community or the existing library system had to demonstrate a need for a library, provide the building site, annually realize 10% of the building's construction to support operation, and lastly, it was to provide free service. Beginning in 1907, the city of Hamilton had applied to Carnegie for funds to expand the existing lane-free library on North 3rd Street. The city had taken over operation of the library in 1868, 2 years after founder Clark Lane had built it, filled it, and operated it at his own expense. In 1909, the city received a polite and forceful decline to their requests. The response letter stated, quote, "Mr. Carnegie cannot be a party to disturbing in any way the gift of a man who showed himself so devoted a citizen as Mr. Lane did. Mr. Carnegie believes that if an appeal to the good citizens of Hamilton were properly made, they would gladly furnish any funds necessary to enlarge Mr. Lane's gift." An editorial in the Hamilton Republican News stated, "Not only does Mr. Carnegie refuse our application, but he reads the city a lecture that has in it just sufficient truth to give sting to his words. It is a fact that Hamilton hasn't shown proper appreciation for the beneficence of Mr. Lane. His gift has not been made, as he doubtless contemplated, the nucleus of a constantly growing institution. Carnegie's money helped build or expand 1,689 libraries across the United States, but Hamilton was not to be one of them. However, some did take Carnegie's words to heart, as the Lane Public Library system is still thriving today." Excuse me. In January of 1969, the Chrysler Corporation purchased 600-plus acres of land at the Monroe Route 63 exit off of I-75. The plan was to construct a new 2.5 million square foot parts stamping plant at a cost of $50 million. In comparison, the Fisher Body plant in Fairfield, which served the same purpose, the stamping of steel for the manufacture of auto body panels and other sheet metal components, totaled just under $1.3 million. The Chrysler Monroe plant was to be 82% larger than Fairfield's Fisher Body plant. The factory was to be a sister plant to Chrysler's Twinburg, Ohio stamping plant, which totaled 1.9 million square feet. The complex would employ 2,500 workers initially and 4,700 individuals when all shifts were online. In 1969, Chrysler stated that the plant might be as much as 5 to 10 years down the road, but they were positioning themselves for a very bright future. Well, needless to say, the early 1970s were not bright for Chrysler or for the auto industry in general. The first few decades were plagued with plant closings and strikes across the nation, as well as in the Midwest in this region. Couple that with the general economic downturn caused by the energy crisis, and the plans never materialized. On September 30th of 1975, Chrysler placed the land up for sale. They had purchased it 6 years earlier at $5,700 an acre. They listed it in 1975 at $7,900 an acre. I'll let you guess at what I-75 fronted property sells for today. I can't find that because nobody will put it out there of what they're actually charging for land. They want you to call. So don't really know, but I'm going to guess it's a lot more than $7,900 an acre. It's also possible that the reason the project wasn't a success is maybe they should have cut an acre off or maybe added an additional acre. So yeah, 666 acres might shy some people away. In 1950, the Atomic Energy Commission was searching for a site to construct a new uranium feed materials processing plant for the manufacture of enriched uranium to be used in atomic weapons. With the help of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and industrial representatives from 10 railroads, the AEC had whittled their selection down to 3 sites. A Hamilton, Ohio area site, a Fernald, Ohio on the Hamilton and Butler County line site, and a site in Terre Haute, Indiana. The actual location of the Hamilton area site was never fully revealed. Discussions in the local papers referred to the project simply as, quote, the atomic plant, and was rumored to have a 45013 zip code, which meant it would be on the west side. And most likely, the selected site, even though it remained a secret, was probably somewhere in Hanover Township. Eventually, in March of 1951, the Fernald site would be announced as the selected location, with 214 of the total 1,050 acres falling within Ross Township in Butler County. 3,000 workers constructed the sprawling multi-building facility, including 323 buildings and 10 uranium processing complexes. It was completed in October of 1954 after over 3 years of construction. Estimated employment was projected to be at around 1,200 people, but in 1956, at a point of its peak production, the plant was actually utilizing just shy of 2,900 workers. By 1979, less than 500 individuals were operating the plant. In 2008, the New York Times reported that the Fernald facility enriched over 500 million pounds of uranium, which was 67% of all uranium used in the Cold War weapons program. The facility closed in 1989 after numerous reports of hazardous air and water contamination, safety violations, and lack of sufficient maintenance. In 2007, the U.S. DOE declared the site cleanup project officially closed after spending $4.4 billion to do so. More than 100,000 drums of waste and 31 million pounds of uranium were removed from the site. However, 3 million cubic yards of waste are still contained on the site, which is now a nature preserve. And to think at the time, in 1950, county and city officials desired the plant's home to be the plant's home in the greatest of ways. So, move slightly just to the south, but who knows what could have happened if it was actually just a further to the north and completely in Butler County. By the way, I just threw that picture in. That's a toy from the early 1950s that you could buy as a science set that actually contains real uranium. That you could see, and that was you could test it. It came with a little Geiger counter and some other things. So, yeah, I would hate to think that we that at that time that we were completely as oblivious as I think some people would like us to believe about that. It was a Herring Hall Marvin Safe Company in Hamilton also milled uranium ore. For use in the Manhattan Project, but it was so top secret that they didn't even tell the workers what they were working with, and they were wearing no safety equipment or anything else, and things like that. So a good chunk of them, I think around 89% of the workers who dealt with those would be, I think, dead within 10 years, most of them from cancer. But in December of 2000, the city of Cincinnati submitted its 800-page application to be a host city for the 2012 Summer Olympic Games. By October of 2001, the city was dropped from consideration by the U.S. Olympic Committee. The other U.S. cities that applied were Dallas, Texas, Houston, Texas, Los Angeles, California, New York, San Francisco, California, Tampa Bay, Florida, and Washington, D.C. Needless to say, Cincinnati was on the outside looking in, probably from the get-go. Of those cities, Cincinnati is more than 25% smaller than the next closest city in terms of population. To say that Cincinnati was a long shot is an understatement. In fact, they were the only city in what the IOC considers as, quote, second tier, based on certain demographic considerations, and the IOC had already claimed very publicly that they were no longer interested in those tier cities and preferred what they called world-class cities such as London, Paris, and New York. In fact, New York was selected as the U.S. representative city that year, but ultimately lost out to London. The Cincinnati proposal included venues as far away as Lexington, Kentucky and Cleveland, Ohio, and even included the construction of a temporary 80,000 square foot stadium venue to meet the criteria. Boy, if that one had ever been built in the 90s, we could have been a lock. However, one Butler County venue was selected for the proposal. Millett Hall on the campus of Miami University in Oxford was selected to host the game's handball competitions. Quite prestigious. I didn't even know there was handball in the Olympics. So there you go. And there may not be any more. But Oxford could have been a home of an Olympic event in 2012, but it was not to be. These next two things are some gentlemen that actually were residents, natives of the county, who did some amazing things, and unfortunately, for whatever, never came back to spread that wealth locally. So the first guy we're going to talk about is Elias Lucky Baldwin. I brought him up in previous program that I have on the ghost towns and stuff like that. He was born in Bunker Hill, which is just outside of Riley, in 1828. The family moved to Indiana when he was 6, and in 1849, he and his wife and a young daughter joined a wagon train that was heading west to California to strike it rich. Legend has it that the only supplies he took were gallons of brandy, tea, and tobacco. Initially, the others in the wagon train scoffed at Baldwin for his choices as not being very practical. By the time the travelers had reached California, Baldwin had sold all of his whiskey along the way to the others in the wagon train, as well as to those they passed along the way, including the brother of Brigham Young, who bought the remaining brandy supply, and he had come to own many of the other settlers' land claims and most of their possessions. He then parlayed the land deals into investments in the massive Comstock silver lode, allowing him to amass a fortune which led to the development of an idea he had involving thoroughbred racing and breeding and the founding of the famed Santa Anita racetrack in the city of Arcadia, California, which he also founded. Baldwin had his boyhood home in Riley dismantled and shipped to California and rebuilt on his property, and it is said that he spent his last days lounging in his old farmhouse. At the time of his death in 1909, Baldwin was worth approximately $25 million, or approximately $750 million today. What benefits to this area might have come to be if Baldwin had decided to come back home instead of settling in California? So this is actually the Comstock silver mine there. That's Santa Anita racetrack in the 1930s up above. And that is Baldwin's guest house on his complex in Arcadia, California. Some of you might recognize that. The TV show Fantasy Island was filmed at his complex. And that is the where they would, the Hervé Villechaize tattoo would go up and ring the bell that the plane was coming. That was that house right there. So, the next guy that we're going to talk about is actually equally interesting, I think. His name was Daniel Beaver. In Greenwood Cemetery, there's a small headstone that reads, Daniel Beaver, lost at sea on the Central America, September 12, 1857, aged 56 years, 4 months, and 5 days. Beaver was a successful Rossville merchant operating the Beaver Tavern on the northeast quarter of the block of what is now Park Avenue and North D Street, beginning in 1828. He later purchased another quarter of the same block, and it was not uncommon to see dozens of wagons in the tavern yard for the night as teamsters stopped their wagons to stay at the establishment between Cincinnati and parts north of town and then back again. Beaver was a congenial, well-liked host, and his business thrived. The community of Rossville also utilized his tavern as the second floor regularly held town hall meetings, dances, concerts, and even school classes. After gold was discovered in California, Beaver took off west to strike it rich, and apparently he did. Beaver was on his way back home aboard the dual-side steam wheeler, the SS Central America, when the ship ran aground. When the ship ran into a hurricane, approximately 160 miles off the coast of South Carolina. Of the 578 people on board, 425 were lost, including Daniel Beaver. The press nicknamed the vessel the Ship of Gold due to its cargo of nearly 15 tons of gold, valued at $8 million in 1857. Today, that's $298 million. The sinking of the ship was one of the four major factors of the financial panic of 1857, as a lot of that gold on the ship was going to the U.S. gold reserves. How much of the $8 million in gold on that ship belonged to Daniel Beaver? And what would he have done with his fortune when he had returned home? Well, that is unknown and have to be speculated. And who knows what benefits the area might have had on his return. So in 1989, they discovered the shipwreck. It's in about 8,000 feet of water. So this is what they found on the floor. This is what it looks like after it's cleaned up. This is actually a photograph, and there were numerous photographs that were found in the wreckage that were perfectly preserved. The water was so cold. So they call her the Mona Lisa of the depths, and that's her picture as it was found. There's some more, and this is leather. The leather is actually preserved. They found entire trunks when they opened them up. They found intact cigars and clothes and other things, and they were actually able to identify a lot of the items to passengers based on documents and other things inside that led to who they were, and so forth. So interesting thing. And again, this was a very contentious site between treasure hunters and things of that sort. And I think eventually there was a lot of court issues. There was a lot of fraud claims. But I think, and just like within the last few years, sometime in the 2000s, the guy who discovered the wreck in 1889 was basically allowed to claim it and continue salvage. So there's a possibility that he's going to get his hands on a good chunk of the $298 million that's down there. Who knows? A lot of things that happened are transportation-wise. So we'll go through some of these real quick. And you can see they're kind of all around the place. So, and some of these probably you may have, as you're driving, go, wow, I really wish this was the case. An Oxford bypass has been in the works since 1963. And it's like a bad burrito. It just keeps coming back. Possibilities have included using US 27 as a starting point, an eastern loop around the city, a western loop around the city, relocation of US 27, extending existing roads, etc. But the possibility that seems to be the most favorable with transportation officials, do nothing. In 2005, the feds earmarked $4 million for the project, which is an additional $14 million over the next 4 years. No work occurred. Since the 1960s, Miami University has selected sites for Millett Hall and Yager Stadium based on potential downtown bypass, which never happened. And now Millett is being targeted for demolition, and instead of moving it out, what are they doing? They're moving it closer to the center of campus. So I think they've given up on a bypass. Hamilton elevated tracks through the town. It was part of the 1920s planning study that I mentioned earlier to alleviate traffic congestion at rail crossings. They basically suggested an elevated track system similar to what you see in New York or Chicago. All right, the French Connection where Gene Hackman's driving underneath and doing all that kind of crazy stuff. Elevated track would run north and south, begin at the north end, just around where the hydraulic is. It would basically go to a height of 16 feet. And would basically taper back down to grade past Grand Avenue. Much like the 20 plan, the suggestion was not made a reality. South Hamilton Crossing has now eventually become a reality. And I went through and counted. There were 14 initiatives to get South Crossing taken care of, the earliest in the 1890s. And so it finally took until 2010, I think, for that to happen. Riverside Freeway, in 1971, OKI regional officials included a new parkway that would ease the travel from Hamilton, Fairfield, and Ross to the new airport in northern Kentucky. The Riverside Freeway was to be built in conjunction with the new Hamilton Freeway, which I'll talk about here shortly. Construction was expected to start in 1979, and a new 8-mile roadway that was to meander along the Great Miami River with its south terminus at the Colerain Freeway, which is US 27 in Ross Township, where then it would merge to I-275. And a portion of the Colerain Freeway was constructed from I-275 to Ross, but that as far as that project went, and we'll talk about that as well. Anybody here familiar with the Anthony Wayne Parkway? Anybody heard of that? It was actually a reality for a while. In 1947, a board created by the state to promote and construct a series of highways that celebrated the history and travels of General Mad Anthony Wayne through a series of parks and monuments on existing state, county, and township roads. By 1957, 450 miles of roads in 23 Ohio counties had blue and white sign markers designating them as part of the Anthony Wayne Parkway. In Butler County, the parkway included Ohio 4 between Cincinnati and Hamilton and US 127 from Hamilton to Eaton. However, the project seemed to languish. The roadside parks were removed in many spots. The marker signs all but disappeared, even though the Ohio Historical Society claims that the Anthony Wayne Parkway Board was in existence until it was abolished in 1993. So, on 127, there was a small roadside park. You had a little thing. So that was actually part of the Anthony Wayne Parkway. So they were building these little roadside rest areas and parks along these roads. They would put little markers with brass plaques on them and things of that sort. It never just claimed fruition and eventually all disappeared. So the Hamilton Freeway in 1971, this was part of the Riverside Parkway Freeway as well. They planned a 4-lane connector freeway extending from Kings Island at I-71 to Millville, Ohio, near the intersection of 129 and US 27. A total of 22 miles. Parts of the plan that were implemented include the High Street Underpass, which was done in 1985, the connector between I-75 and Hamilton, which was done in 1999. Aspects that were not realized were the link from I-71 to I-75, which would now go through huge residential developments in Mason, and the route through Hamilton, which most likely south of High Street with the new bridge over the Great Miami River at Knightsbridge, most likely, and a section paralleling Millville Avenue to Millville. While with other developments completed since, odds are the current portions are that will never exist. It was a designed 4-lane highway that would basically be going down Knightsbridge Boulevard or Drive. The Coleraine Freeway, we've talked about it as well. It was basically more commonly known as the US 27 connector extension. Between 71 and 74, regional transportation officials considered 8 options for extending US 27 from Ross up to Oxford. The project was considered as necessary for safety and congestion issues, but the energy crisis in the early 70s killed the funding for road projects. The project has been shelved and funding is yet to be received. It still pops up again occasionally as well. There have been some improvements made on US 27 in Ross Township area, to create some safety, better safety situations, but a 4-lane highway all the way up from Ross up to Oxford is not a reality at this point. The Hamilton Circuit Road, you probably know it as Washington Boulevard. It was a concept that was initially created in 1909. Plans in 1920 and 1948 proposed a similar loop. Isolated portions of the loop have been constructed. However, none of the pieces are on the east side of the river. It was to be a loop that went around the whole city. The first section completed was in 1932. It was 1.25 miles long and stretched between New London Road and Millville Avenue. It would not be until the 1950s that the next sections were completed in the West Park subdivision, another short piece in the Brookwood subdivision. The longest section reaches from Main Street across Brookwood, Eaton, and Cleveland Avenues to West Elkton Road, which is now fronted by the front of the Hamilton Freshman School. That was completed in the 1990s. The latest section to be dealt with occurred in 2003 with a short link through Milliken Woods. So, will Washington Boulevard ever completely encircle the city? Odds are no. An inland waterway barge canal, a proposed to widen and straighten the existing and dilapidated Miami-Erie Canal into an inland barge waterway, gained momentum in 1914 and then again in 1920. The project had gained quite a bit of support from state lawmakers, but the election of 1920 saw the tide turn as new representatives were not as bullish on the project. In 1931, the project again appeared. Locks were suggested at Cleves, New Baltimore, and Woodsdale, along with a hydroelectric power plant in Woodsdale as well. But the decision was to turn the old canal to highways, and that path was chosen. Miami-Erie Superhighway began in 1927. The idea was to create a multi-lane highway between Dayton through Middletown to Hamilton on top of the old canal was bandied about. In 1929, monies were set aside to study the project. However, the stock market crash in October drained all funds for such projects. In 1931, the project came back under the auspices of the WPA, and small sections of the superhighway were completed, such as Erie Highway in Hamilton and Verity Parkway in Middletown. The war again put a halt to the project, and then eventually Eisenhower's interstate freeway system and the decision to construct I-75 put an end to the project completely. The Cincinnati International Airport, and I'm not talking about the one that exists in northern Kentucky. Federal officials pressed Cincinnati before World War II to relocate its airport from Lunken Field, which suffered from flooding issues. As a matter of fact, its common nickname was Sunken Lunken. 1948, Cincinnati officials visited Butler County to seek support for a new airport within 12 miles of Hamilton in the community of Blue Ash. However, Northern Kentucky had dedicated a terminal at an existing airfield in Boone County, and by 1947, Delta, American, and TWA flights were using that field. The Blue Ash site never gained traction and remained a general aviation airport until it closed in 2012, while CVG became the region's international airport. Speaking of international airports, in 1962, 11 counties, including Butler County, supported a plan to create a regional and international airport in Wilmington at an existing airfield that began operations in 1929. The proposed Armstrong-Glenn Regional International Airport was 46 miles from Hamilton, and despite competition from numerous other area airports, plans were pushed ahead until numerous major airlines called the project unfeasible. The site is now the Wilmington Air Park, which serves freight carriers such as FedEx, UPS, and DHL. 1957, the city of Hamilton placed, imagine this happened today. 1957, the city of Hamilton placed 7 bond issues on the ballot, as well as a school levy was placed on the ballot as well. Needless to say, every single one of those initiatives failed. Included was an underpass at South Hamilton Crossing, new sanitary and storm sewers, road improvements, repair and widening of the existing Columbia Bridge, the purchase of additional lands in Peck's Addition, and the construction of a new bridge at Neyland Boulevard and South Avenue, which is now Knightsbridge Drive. The proposition of a new bridge at that location has not come up again since the improvements of the Columbia Bridge did eventually pass in 1964, and a new bridge was built. The original expanding and straightening of Ohio Route 63 occurred in 1969, and since 1979, the promise of an Ohio Route 63 extension from Ohio Route 4 to Trenton, along with a Trenton Route 73 bypass around the south of the city, has hovered over the area for years. The idea was to provide a more direct route with I-75 to help facilitate the attraction of the new Miller Brewing plant that might be built in the area. Well, it was. The plant arrived, but the road improvements did not. In the 1990s, the extension of Route 63 was to cross the Great Miami River and end at US 127 near 7 Mile. In the 2000s, a plan was agreed upon by the OKA Board of Trustees and by the state of Ohio, but the state of Ohio backed out of its portion of the $96 million project due to lack of federal funding. 2011, a new plan envisioned a 3.5-mile extension to Route 63 from Route 63 to Wayne-Madison Road, and by 2014, the cost of that proposal for a 3.5-mile stretch of freeway was $126 million due to requirements building the bridge over the Great Miami floodplain. 2019, federal funds did not include the project, and so the extension of Route 63 remains in limbo. Talked about this a little bit earlier, an example of a project that from the very beginning was a harbinger of economic disaster and failed expectations. Planning began in 1968 and construction commenced in 1972 for an interesting idea to bolster downtown Middletown shopping and stem the loss of business to the east side of the city near I-75. Unfortunately, almost immediately the opposite began to occur. While construction closed off sections of Central Avenue and Broad Street due to the novel idea of enclosing those streets and creating an enclosed urban walking mall, many businesses in that area were adjacent to the construction zones, were actually forced to close. Many went out of business due to lack of sufficient walking paths, dangerous conditions, and no customers. Numerous anchor stores in the area, including the Central Store, JCPenney's, and Maybelline Carew, closed and left as well. Sears and Roebuck, which was a block away, left Middletown completely. And then in November of 1975, a new mall opened at the freeway, and Town Mall created additional problems. City Center Mall never achieved above 85% occupancy in its lifetime. That was the peak. Less than two, and the bleed of business from downtown to the east all right, continued. By the 1980s, abandoned, boarded up, and cordoned off storefronts inhabited the city center complex. It was then decided in the early 1980s that changing the name from the City Center Mart to the City Center Mall might attract business and customers. It did not. Safety concerns became an issue. Maintenance and upkeep was costing the city over $500,000 a year by the late 1990s. So a new plan and direction was established, and in 2001, the wrecking ball took down the city's albatross of failed hopes, and in the last month of 2002, the new downtown Middletown, which looked very similar to the old downtown Middletown, minus the commercial vibrancy of 50 years earlier, was rededicated. While small improvements have been made, the struggles for Middletown's downtown area still persevere. Oxford Township wanted to secede from Butler County at one point. So a mere 40 years after the nation suffered a devastating secession that led to civil war, Oxford Township residents came to the same conclusion that separation from the rest of Butler County to become their own county was desirable as a course of action to combat high taxes, loss of autonomy, and what they said was, quote, an attempt to recapture the spirit of specialness of their area that they felt they had lost, as well as to resurrect the original intention of the township's creation in the first place, which was to be tax support for the stronghold of education in the area. Many in Oxford believed the county as a whole was being overly taxed to support payments of debts and other expenses incurred by Hamilton. Pet projects in the Hamilton, as well as bridges over the river, and the final straw that broke the camel's back was the Soldiers, Sailors, and Pioneers Monument. Proposed in 1897 by GAR veterans and with the special bond issue on the ballot in 1899, the funding of the project passed overwhelmingly in Hamilton, but failed in every other single voting jurisdiction in the county. However, the population of Hamilton overrode the rest of the population of the county, so the initiative passed. Many outside Oxford expressed the sentiment that if the residents of the village thought they were being overtaxed then, wait till they had to foot their own bill for their own new county expenses, such as their own courthouse and other services. It was a short-lived battle because the backers of the secession plan had not read the Ohio law on the subject. New counties shall contain not less than 20,000 persons. Oxford Township and Village contained shy of 6,000 people. It also stated that no new county shall contain less than 400 square miles of land. Oxford Township was about 36 square miles of land. There might have been no Fort Sumter in Oxford in 1901, but now it seems that tax battles in that corner of the county have continued, but now have turned inward, with the city and township regularly at odds on a lot of issues. In the first decade of the 19th century, when Robert Fulton demonstrated that steam travel on rivers was viable and could be profitable, local business leaders and municipal officials along the Great Miami River looked to the waterway as a path to prosperity. Earlier, farmers and merchants had to rely on flatboats to carry goods to larger markets. It was not uncommon for flatboats to travel down the Great Miami to the Ohio River and then to the Mississippi River to as far away as New Orleans to sell products. It was a dangerous and time-consuming trek, taking anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks by water, and about the same amount to get back to Ohio on horseback, because you could not go back up. So basically, you would take the boat down, sell your products, sell your boat, buy a horse, ride back to Ohio. Steam power could cut that time immensely, and it no longer had to be a one-way trip via water. Geography favored the move as the Great Miami River fell an average of 3 feet per mile, making downstream travel expedient. Just as an example, the Ohio River falls at a rate of just shy of 6 inches a mile. So it's actually, the Great Miami is actually pretty steep, which would make it nice going down, difficult coming back. And they tried that several times in the early 1800s with very limited success. Hamilton, Middletown, and Dayton merchants and leaders joined forces in proposing river channel improvements to both deepen and widen the Great Miami River to Ohio leaders. However, Cincinnati had more political clout and convinced politicians to decline the projects for fear that Cincinnati would be bypassed by local merchant shipping and therefore suffer economically. In 1825, when the Miami-Erie Canal was proposed, Cincinnati leaders jumped at the project as they knew canal boats would have to be unloaded in their city and then goods transferred to steamboats on the Ohio riverfront. In 1829, when the Miami and Erie Canal became operational, thoughts of steamboats on the Great Miami River disappeared. One last one, and who knows if this will ever be. I think it's not going to based on recent reports, but will the west side of Hamilton ever get its Red Lobster? I'm going to say no, it's not, because they're closing stores left and right around the country. But so, any questions?